You know, one of my favorite movies that's coming up was Christmas Carol.
All right.
And you think about old Ebenezer Scrooge there, it was out of sorts when he turned kind to people. Which was the biggest thing about that whole movie. So the spirit behind that movie is the same as what is going on here with this lesson today. And it's about David. David was the second king of Israel, but he didn't ask for that position. David rose up to the top by defeating Goliath, being a war hero, and he got introduced to Saul. You know, one of his commanders took him in there and said, explained to him who David was. Saul took a liking to David. He took a liking to him. Although Saul was a very Ebenezer Scrooge person type himself. One of the reasons why he was that way, because when you come into power, and you still see a lot of this going on today, it is expected for the next person in that family to take the reins after the leader passes on. And hopefully it would have been that son. Now we witnessed the same thing when Saddam Hussein came into power over in Iraq. And what had happened was he came into power, and the gist behind this is that everyone from that family was taken out because they wanted to keep that very same bloodline there. Those folks that were standing in the wings waiting to move up were all killed. And it still takes place in theocratic type societies today. We were expecting one of Saddam's sons to come up there, and they were just as Ebenezer Scrooge heroes. So it's sort of unlikely to see a person like David get there and didn't harm anyone. He kept the promise. And we'll talk about that promise in the lesson here. He didn't take anyone out. His kindness was sought out. I'm going to start out in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 through 4. If I can get a reader, please.
David asked, is there anyone still left in the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They summoned him to appear before David, and the king said to him, are you Ziba? At your service, he replied. The king asked, is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? Ziba answered the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet. Where is he? The king asked. Ziba answered, he is at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo-Debar.
Okay, and I mentioned, you know, back in those days you had someone that come up, hey, is anyone here left from the house of Saul? You would probably think, since they were so conditioned that automatically, oh, he's going to start taking out the rest of Saul's folks. So they can start his bloodline, and David's kids and all are going to be able to take over. And I would like to have seen Ziba at that time, or able to just take a look at the expression on the face. But he mentioned to show kindness, which is out of the ordinary back in those days. Now, it mentions down here where it talks about the son of Jonathan.
All right.
Now let's get the story behind Jonathan. When David was introduced to Saul, Saul's son Jonathan was waiting down in the wings. So when David and Jonathan finally got together, they took a liking to each other. They took a liking. It's the same, you know, as we have folks here that, you know, we've got a church here, you know, we got a body of the church, which is all of us. But there's some folks that are in here, like wife is likened to Augustine, and they call each other a lot. Mabel, they talk each other a lot, back and forth. That's the way Jonathan and David was. And it talks here about David wanted to show him some kindness. Throughout that whole time when they were together, Jonathan passes on. And you see here, they're coming up in the next reading, that he has a son. I'm not going to try to pronounce that name right now. Wait till I get up there to it. But he had a pact with Jonathan that was so strong that he made a promise that he's going to continue to show the kindness to those that belong to the house of Saul, regardless how nasty Saul was to just about everybody. Which is the reason why he was asking about someone from the house of Saul. He had made a promise with him, and he had vowed against destroying Saul's house. That's why he added, so that he can show some kindness. You know, there's some that said that David's motives involved keeping his enemies close. In other words, if I keep my enemies close to me, I can keep an ear to the wall to find out whether there's someone that has something against me. But on the other hand, it was just his kindness that was out there for everyone. Now David was a warrior. He was a poet, author, and he also played music for Saul. He was a musician.
Right.
He used to soothe Saul's nerves, make him a little bit more kind. So, similarly, he might have thought that being kind to Saul's family would score him a lot of political points. But you know, he was selected, chosen by God to go and sit in that position. He had no alternative.
Right.
Like Pastor says all the time, God said, I knew you before you was even in your mother's womb. Already got a plan for you.
All right.
So there are some things that you just don't have any choice in. Now, if David hadn't have been chosen by God, he'd have probably looked at something else to do. He had to run out of giants to kill. You know? So each and every endeavor that he became involved in, God was with him and he knew it. And that's the reason why he did not step out of line. He accepted that position as the king. The greatest king ever amongst the Israelites. So David made that pledge to Jonathan, and it went so far to endure what calls continual kindness. The Lord had cut the enemies off from them. He had them. It's really sort of weird in that time because folks have been conditioned that when someone else comes in, that's going to automatically mean some killing to try to ensure that that bloodline stays in place. So it was out of the ordinary for them at that time. And when you're taking a look at kindness, it's sometimes described as maybe acts of loyalty, just being a good person that allows those that you talk to and intermingle with to take a look inside of your heart. Heart's a pretty big place to live in.
Right.
And David had a heart. You know, when you have a covenant with God, we know that a lot of times, I mean, we're all human beings. God knows that we're going to sin sometimes. That's why he continues with that grace and mercy. He did the same thing with David. David went all this straightforward, up, good guy, but would change his mind about how he was going to act with people. But he knew that the Lord was with him. And the Lord wanted him to show that kindness. trustworthy, being loyal, is probably the context and how that he was looked at amongst his people. Covenants, at times, struck in situations where there was an unbalance of power amongst a group of people. But David and Jonathan had already committed to their own covenant, that he was the heir to Saul's throne, and David was a soldier. Another reason why they were so close. They were just like homeboys, grew up in the same neighborhood, and looked out for each other. If you ever come along with someone and you're trying to figure out how this person is going to be, or how you should react to them, and the person comes in, shakes your hand, and pulls you and gives you a big hug, well, the same thing was taking place in amongst the people. They were not used to anything like that. So these guys were like two peas in a pod. So, David is there and he's talking to the house servant there, Saul, and Ziba's been there, probably helped raise all of Saul's kids and everything. And he was happy to see that there was a remnant there from Saul, which is his son, Jonathan. And Jonathan had passed on. So we get into the next reading here, going to see that there's a lot of conversation that takes place mostly on David's part, because he's ensuring that he stays to his word. You know, this is the first mention of Jonathan's son. It's not even knew that he had a son. But due to the fact that he made that covenant with Jonathan, that he was going to keep it and going to extend it on to his son. This person there in that house, Ziba, was held very high. If you're a servant as such, you're trusted with a lot of, maybe, I can't say secret things that were confidential to the person that you're serving. You know them very well. To the point where there you are, you're serving them, and you've laid their clothes out. This is how you want them to look on the day. You know that person's taste. You know what that person would expect from you, because you've been there the whole time. That's how trusted Ziba was. And actually, he was the manager, as we're going to see, of Saul's estate, because he's not taking anything away from him. He's enhancing Saul's estate and those that were left there for him. So, we see here in those few verses that they had made an oath with each other. Of course, David inquired there about if anyone that sin was left, and he was thrilled to learn that there was someone that he could exchange with and treat him just like he wanted to treat Jonathan. So, we can go into the next group, 2 Samuel there, chapter 9, verses 5 through 7. Read it, please.
So King David had him brought from Lodebar, from the house of Maacah, son of Amel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay his honor. David said, Mephibosheth, at your service, he replied. Don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table.
So, here again, he's showing that he's taking care of Saul's estate, regardless how nasty person he was. And he was happy to see that there was a resident that was there that was a family member of Saul. Jonathan's long past. And he felt that he never had enough time to show Jonathan as much kindness as he wanted him to show, or the kindness that he felt that God was always with him and expected him to do. You know, as I mentioned before, you get a chance to meet a person and you didn't know how they were going to take you. They basically had to bow down to each other. David came down to a level that was not used to be seen by the common citizen at that time. You know, there's some people, when you see them in the crowd, you can immediately spot just by looking at that person, how that person is. Let's go about John the Baptist as an example. When you hear the stories about him, you probably think that he's going to show up dressed up in a big king-type robe, crown in his head, jewels all over the place. But John didn't walk around like that. So when he showed up and got this animal hide on and a belt that he made, you wouldn't think that that's that type of person. I went through the same thing when I was in the bank. I finally had a chance to meet the owner of the bank, Mr. Cass. I expected a three-piece suit. You know, all shined up, got his age with him and everything. And he was worth millions. He showed up in a pair of toe jeans, some boat sneakers, and those jeans were high water. And I couldn't believe it. So think about how they felt when they first met each other. Okay? Now, this place there, Lodabar, was a village east of the Jordan River in Gilead, and associated with the tribe of Gad. It talks about that in Joshua. It was like a political center. A political center, which is probably the best way to describe what we might call the capital nowadays. And there was a certain attitude that went along with it. And I guess that's why they both were shocked once they had a chance to meet each other. Now, the outcome of David's inquiry about any relatives that were still there, you might have thought that they had changed, but they hadn't. He stayed right there with it the way he was, the way he promised his son, and he explained to Mephibosheth that he didn't want him to be afraid of him. You don't have to start ducking and dodging money. I'm not going to kill you. I'm here to fulfill the covenant that I made with your father. The covenant that you made with your father. Wow. David addressed him, you call it like a differential language. In other words, he spoke to Jonathan's son as though he were the king. Something is not too well expected of a common citizen. Mephibosheth had no power at all. He had nothing behind him. And when David said to him, "Fear not, for I am surely true in the kindness of Jonathan, thy father's sake," he told him he was going to restore all the land and all the property that he had there. And he was going to make sure that those relatives that were left would be able to eat every day. In other words, he was going to have folks that worked for him come down, restore their property, fix the fields up out there. We're talking about an agricultural society back at that time. One of the things that showed your prominence was how much property you had. They didn't take it, he gave it all back to them. This is rightly yours. He said, "You shall eat bread continuously." We call it nowadays overflow. It's a big time blessing. He wanted to ensure that he continued to show the kindness for his father's sake So you can keep that covenant with Jonathan. Well, that was a friend. A big time friend. Now, if we turn this story around and put ourselves in Mephibosheth's shoes, and after they met, what would you say the exchange actually went like? Was he still really going to keep his covenant? Can I trust this guy? It's pretty hard to say. But they had a pretty good look at each one of them's heart. Now, when David mentioned that he was going to give all the belongings back, he was the king. And the king actually, by rights, possessed that land that Saul had owned. But he didn't work it. He didn't act as though, he had his folks out there taking care of it and bringing me all the yield in here into my castle or wherever he had resided. So when someone comes up and tells you, hey, this is yours, it's out of the ordinary for those days. This type of action, up until even to include up to our Civil War, that the more property that you had, the more prominent you was in that society. It doesn't take place that way anymore. So when someone comes up and say, hey, I'm going to give you all this land, the farm, the house, and everything like that, you probably just, man, get out of here, get in the car and take off. You don't have anybody like that that will come up and just help you. You will have a few. We're going to hear about the Santa Claus person that helped someone out there along the line for Christmas. As I mentioned a couple of Sundays ago. We should look at every day just as though it's Christmas and help somebody.
Amen.
And then waiting around at Christmas time. You'll find out that if you show that kindness the same as David is showing here, that you got a big heart. That you don't have to try to do it where everyone can see you doing it.
All right.
Amen.
You want to show out.
Amen.
Back in the time, the Israelites would do that. They would come and they would give so much, and they would make sure that in the town square everybody saw it. Y'all saw what I just did? Why can't you just give, be nice about it, and keep that in your heart?
Amen.
Makes you feel good.
Amen. Amen.
That you help someone.
Yes. Jesus.
All right. Let's take a look at this person here, Ziba. Ziba had apparently grown pretty wealthy as a result of controlling over Saul's estate. This is the servant. Thinking back while I was reading this, when you go back and think about other stories in the Bible, about one of the reasons why that a mother would want to have a son, to ensure that that estate that the father had worked up on stayed within that family, or the mother went over. Now, Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. So that house was pretty well full.
Amen.
There was no one there to pass it on to, and poor Jonathan was more or less a resident there, and Ziba was one of them. Now Ziba emphasized loyalty to David, calling himself a servant twice. I am at your service. Now, nonetheless, you looked for an opportunity to have all that annulled from Ziba. You're showing yourself. You meet someone, Mr. No, call me Francis. Get closer and closer to each other. That's the way that this was working out. Now, whereas Jonathan had loved David as his own soul, David would care for the rest of Saul's family, especially those that had belonged to Jonathan. So, let's go into our next group of verses here, called Kindness Secured, 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 9 through 12. You can read it, please.
Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And the grandson of your master will always eat my table.
All right.
Sons and now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do. So that's where at David's table, like one of the king's sons had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of David.
Amen. Amen.
Pretty packed house, right?
Man,
You know? And you would think that with all of those folks right there in that one situation, there'd probably be different set attitudes in each. Everyone has their own world that they live in themselves, but they have to commingle with the rest of those that are there. As I mentioned, Ziba called herself a servant twice. I'm at your service.
All right.
I'm at your beck. And that's one of the reasons why that house continued to prosper. As I mentioned before, Ziba was a big-time servant. He knew what he knew what the master would have expected of him. Well, I know the master doesn't like this, Saul doesn't like that, he doesn't like that. But he took in everything as he could and tried to ensure that it was passed on to all of them so that household would continue.
All right.
Now, Mephibosheth seemed to be sincerely and humbly grateful for David's kindness. Mephibosheth no doubt knew that his father's friendship with David was that strong. They can continue to compare ideas and everything and probably talk about the past. You know, you can see a lot of times in a person just by the way they act, or how they talk with you, or how you all exchange ideas with each other, where this family came from. You know, I was coming up to make any difference what school I went to. Went up to Alabama A&M, started college. Oh, you Charlie Milton's boy? Everybody knew you. It's the same thing with these sons from Ziba, which went on back into the family of Saul and Jonathan. So it's apparent that Jonathan had well trained his son to see that David is not this type of person and accept him. Now David executed not only kindness, but also what's known as restorative justice. That's when he gave their property back. This is yours. We all know that it belongs to God first, but he put it back into the hands of the folks that had earned it, instead of restored inside the house. Now, if we recall, Mephibosheth was lame. Now, there might have been a situation where maybe Ziba was taking advantage of it. You know, he took a fall when he was young and couldn't walk. However, everything was still there and it was never taken away. it probably took him in awe when he had been there that whole time and no one else looked down for him but Ziba. And someone tell you that this is yours. It said, thou therefore, this is 10, and thy sons and thy servants shall till the land for him, and thou shalt bring fruits in the fruits, that thy master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, thy master's son, shall eat bread at mine table. Now, although Mephibosheth would eat at David's house, the land would still provide for the rest of Mephibosheth's family. They provide for them. They didn't have to care about a thing. And Ziba had apparently grown wealthy as a result of this, because Ziba had taken control of Saul's estate. Once Ziba emphasized his loyalty to David, again, they called him the servant a couple times, he didn't protest David's decree. David didn't say, Ziba, you and your kids get out. Because he made sure that Mephibosheth was taken care of as it was before. So he wasn't just kind to Jonathan's son. Mephibosheth's servants and all the other people that were living in that house, he let them stay. How many times you see something like that nowadays? You know, I went to school instead of going to one of my relatives in the past. And it's my father's cousin. You think about the situation that Saul and Jonathan had passed on. Same the situation my mother and I sort of had a falling out because I told her I wasn't going to the funeral because it wasn't going to be a solemn moment. Everybody's going to be coming out all over the United States to find out what they're going to get. And I didn't go. And of course she came back late on that night and she was mad. I knew what was going to happen.
All right.
I knew it. And see, David was the opposite. He didn't put it out. Very kind person. Now, verse number 12, and Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all that dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants unto Mephibosheth, as I mentioned before. Now this is Jonathan's grandson. This is the person that was going to carry on everything as a wolf within the family, keeping that within the family, even after Mephibosheth had passed. His son was going to inherit his property. Although one might expect that David would say, well, you know, when you pass on, my son's going to come back and get this. You can't do that. If your heart is filled with kindness, you can around a lot. Share it out there with other folks who's out there. David's sons would have some feelings about Mephibosheth also. They became close. So you've got two whole different families there that never really knew each other outside of David and Jonathan. And now they've grown to be one big family there together. Kindness is not just a way of life. It's an experience. Not just for you to show me kindness. It's an experience for those that are accepting your kindness also. It tells you that this is how you should act around your peers or with your peers. Farmers, especially back in this time, would show kindness toward each other. This farmer's sick, I'm going to go over and help his family. Then I'll work his fields for him so that his family could continue doing this. And they would do the same thing for me if I'm sick. You know, starting college, there were sometimes out there, and you know, your dad and your mama give you so much money, hey, you can only spend this much. But you go across some hard times sometimes out there in school. You know, I remember my sister would come home and she would eat some of the weirdest things. Warm sardine with cheese. Why are you eating something like that?
Lord have mercy.
And you know, when you look in your cupboard and you're in school, and that's what's left, that's what you ate. But she had a taste for it, and I thought it was weird myself. You know, maybe she had all your food groups there and everything. So there were some times that you could show some kindness for other people. You might buy you lunch or something like that. Hey, look, I got this book that you're going to need next semester. You want me to save it for you? Hey, sure, man, I appreciate it. It's acts of kindness. Some might look at it as being small, but when you're out there doing stuff like that and going to school, it pays off really at the end.
Amen.
But not only should you show that kindness, you should live within that kindness amongst each other, especially if you're in a group like that. Now that I'm a lot older, I enjoy myself helping someone. Not just let those who come in and try to help me. Now for David, the idea that he would help others based on his own remembrance and experiences is a running theme throughout the text that's in this. Not one time did he say, God told me to do this. But this was already instilled in him. Although God was watching it. But he sees everything that you do. He's always and constantly looking inside of your heart. Now, he showed that justice and that kindness to Jonathan's son. He also had received that same kindness from Jonathan. David sought to display in his position as being king the characteristics of divine justice. Divine justice. That was actually required of the Israelites as a whole. We know the stories even when they come out of Egypt so many times that God had to continue to show that he was taking care of it. A couple of weeks ago we had lessons about that. The Sunday school lesson. And it just relived itself again. You know, I'm not trying to preach anything like that. But this stuff is true today, that we need to not only show kindness amongst each other, because you know who's showing us kindness every day? When we open our eyes.
Amen.
God is doing that. God has shown us, especially through Jesus' life, how kind he is.
Yeah, right.
Sent us down, he sent him down here, he collected up all those sins. And our ancestors, those sins we were out there doing today, and made sure that when we did something wrong, it was already forgiven. Well, that's a powerful message there.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, very, very powerful message. So, kindness goes beyond loving. Even those folks that we would look at as being our enemies. So in closing, to think about when you do something good for someone, if you're not used to that,
Right.
you don't have to do too much exploring. But we all should be used to knowing that this person is going to treat us this way. It's what would be expected, and God expects that out of all of us every day. Every day. All right. Getting on, yes, the kids. I don't really follow who was up on that. Are the children up today?
Yes.
Yeah. Make sure I keep up with the men. they can come in and get their input there. That's just the only way.